Did you know that Verstappen started the weekend at Imola saying the car was unmanageable and ended up winning the race? What looked like a technical disaster ended up being one of the most calculated victories of his career. What do you think? Was it luck, pure talent, or a masterstroke by Red Bull? Let me know in the comments. How did Red Bull manage to transform a troubled car into a winning machine in less than 48 hours? In this video, we'll analyze how Verstappen and Red Bull changed the script at the 2025 Imola GP, overcoming technical issues, defeating McLaren, and sending a clear message to the rest of the grid. Imola isn't just any circuit. It's one of the most demanding on the Formula One calendar. Tight corners, technical sections, and very few places to overtake. For the teams, it represents an aerodynamic and strategic challenge. For the drivers, one mistake can cost them the entire race. In 2025, Imola was more than just a race. It was a test of time between the three teams fighting for the championship: Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari. They all arrived with new updates and the promise that the championship is still open. Every detail counted. McLaren was coming off a dominating win in Miami with a 1-2 finish that shook the confidence of its rivals. The British team seemed to have found the formula to lead both Saturdays and Sundays. Its aerodynamic package was working. Piastri and Norris were on fire. Because of this, many expected them to control Imola as well. Ferrari, for its part, arrived as the host. Racing at home always adds pressure, but also extra motivation. They had worked hard to fine-tune the SF25's performance, especially on medium-speed sections. Still, they knew they were up against two better-prepared giants. And then there was Red Bull. In theory, they were still a benchmark team. But recent results had been inconsistent. Problems with tire degradation, setup adjustments that didn't yield the expected results, and a Max Verstappen who wasn't comfortable. The RB21 had potential, yes, but it wasn't showing. Friday's free practice was a reality check for Red Bull. Verstappen couldn't find his rhythm in key sections of the track, especially in high-load areas like the famous Ravazza. The car was difficult to handle. Rear-end stability was lost under heavy braking, and corner entry was sluggish. The Dutchman put it bluntly: the car wasn't responding. McLaren looked set to dominate another weekend. Their times were solid, the car's balance was fine-tuned, and both Piastri and Norris displayed confidence. But in Formula One, everything can change from one day to the next. And as Saturday approached, Red Bull had a decision to make: continue suffering or transform their car from within. And it was there at that critical moment that the true story of this Grand Prix began. A story of adjustment, analysis, simulation, and risk. Red Bull locked themselves in the data, the telemetry, the details. Because they knew that if they wanted to beat McLaren, it wasn't enough to be good, they had to be perfect. Friday at Imola was, without exaggeration, a wake-up call for Red Bull. Max Verstappen finished free practice with serious balance issues. The car was unstable in high downforce areas, with unpredictable behavior both under braking and corner exit. Especially in the second sector, where precision is key to gaining time, the RB21 seemed to be working against the driver, not with him. The load was not well distributed, the car lacked clean traction on the curbs, and corrections were constant. From the pit wall, the team's body language spoke for itself: frustration, tension, and most worryingly, a lack of clarity about which direction to take. Verstappen made it clear to the media: the car isn't responding as it should. We're far from where we want to be. The most worrying thing wasn't just the poor performance, but the lack of consistency. While McLaren was achieving clean, predictable laps with competitive times, Red Bull couldn't stabilize its pace. The engineers began to identify erratic behavior in the aerodynamics. In fast corners, the airflow would break earlier than expected, causing the car to become more nervous the more the driver pushed it. That, on a circuit like Imola, is lethal. They knew it. That's why that night wasn't just another one for the Milton Keynes team. It was a marathon session of simulations, reviewing track data, and in-depth analysis of the car's behavior. They stayed up late, evaluating millimetric variables, looking for answers in every corner. And that's where the difference between a good team and a champion begins to become apparent. Red Bull didn't bring a huge package of updates, as many expected. They didn't make a revolution, they performed precision surgery. They decided to intervene in very specific areas: the rear wing, the profile of the side pods, and the diffuser configuration. They adjusted the angle of incidence of the wing to allow for better stability in fast corners, without sacrificing too much top speed. They redesigned the side pods to make the airflow to the rear of the car cleaner and more efficient, reducing the drag created by the vortices exiting the wheels. And most subtly, but no less importantly, they revised the floor of the car, narrowing its center section to increase the Venturi effect. This not only gave them more downforce, but also improved the car's response on combined stages, where slow and medium-speed corners intertwine. Verstappen described it with a phrase that sums it all up: "Now I can attack." That feeling of having a car that allows you to push to the limit with confidence is what transforms an average qualifying session into a victory. On Saturday morning, the data began to confirm this. The RB21 was more stable in critical areas, and Max once again had full control over the rear axle, allowing him to push more freely. It still wasn't the perfect car, but it was a competitive one. And most importantly, one that behaved predictably lap after lap. Red Bull's technical turnaround was as surgical as it was courageous. It wasn't about improvising, but rather executing a plan based on a deep understanding of the car and the team's ability to react under pressure. While other teams like McLaren stood their ground, relying on the strength of their aerodynamic package, Red Bull was transforming an unbalanced car into a winning tool. The result was a machine that, without the need for radical changes, managed to maximize its potential just when it needed it most. With this transformation, Red Bull not only returned to competition, it returned to leadership. The execution and decisions that turned this technical turnaround into a victory on the track. Because making changes is only half the battle. Knowing how to use them at the right time is what separates the best from the champions. From the moment the lights went out at Imola, it was clear that Max Verstappen had come into Sunday with a completely different mindset. Not only did he have a transformed car thanks to the team's technical work, he had also regained something even more important: full confidence in his work tool. And that, in Formula One, changes everything. Despite starting from second place, Max didn't wait a lap to attack. He knew the opportunity lay at the start, in those critical first meters where reflexes, intuition, and a good understanding of the situation are worth more than any simulator. When Oscar Piastri launched his McLaren from pole, he had better initial traction, but Verstappen remained calm. He opted for something unconventional, staying on the outside line into the Tamburello corner, a decision that involved greater risk but also more room for maneuver under braking. The key was in that pinpoint moment when Max delayed his braking point. While everyone expected him to line up behind the McLaren to maintain his position, he launched himself around the outside, using the suction effect to close the corner on the inside. The move was precise, aggressive, but above all calculated. It wasn't a leap into the dark, it was a dynamic reading of the situation. Coming out of the chicane, he was already in the lead. And that was the moment the race changed. Not because Piastri made a mistake, but because Verstappen understood exactly what he needed to do and executed it flawlessly. From then on, he was in absolute control. With the lead secured, the next big challenge was to maintain pace without destroying the tires. Imola is harsh on those who overdo it, and under normal conditions, that would have been a real concern. But this is where Saturday's technical work came into its own. The RB21, with its new setup, offered a much more stable balance in fast corners and allowed for more efficient tire management. Verstappen didn't need to overexert the car to set competitive times. In fact, subsequent data revealed that in sectors 2 and 3, he maintained an average gap of 0.3 per lap over his pursuers. This consistency, lap after lap, was what ultimately broke the McLaren's pace. As Norris and Piastri tried to close the gap, the wear on their rear tires began to take its toll. Both drivers had to lift slightly in key sections to avoid excessive sliding. In contrast, Verstappen was able to maintain his pace, regulate the energy of his compounds, and avoid overheating. This strategic difference was essential for what came next, the virtual safety car. On lap 32, when Kimi Antonelli retired and the VSC was activated, Red Bull reacted with surgical composure. They called Max into the pits at exactly the right moment and made a 2.2-second stop. The change to hard tires was clean, error-free, and most impressively, without losing the lead. This synchronicity between driver and pit wall was one of the key moments of the entire race. Once on the new compound, management became even clearer. Max knew he didn't need to take risks. He just had to maintain the gap and take care of the car. And he did so with the precision of a Swiss watch. Each lap was executed with tactical discipline, without the need to push beyond what was necessary. The RB21 remained solid at critical points of the track, withstanding the pressure without showing any vulnerability. McLaren, meanwhile, began to struggle with its own aerodynamic package. The balance that had benefited them so much in qualifying turned against them. Their tires dropped faster, and every attempt to attack was transformed into lost time. Even Ferrari, hoping for a miracle on their home track, couldn't get close enough to the podium. Hamilton salvaged a fourth place, but the fight had already been decided later on. Verstappen's victory wasn't just a triumph of speed. It was a complete manual on how to run a perfect race in complex conditions. He knew when to attack, how to defend, and above all, when to manage without losing control. What at the start of the weekend seemed like a chaotic scenario ended in a display of strategy, adaptation, and composure. The combination of Red Bull's engineering and Verstappen's ability to interpret every phase of the race was what made the difference. A flawless performance with no room for doubt, and a perfect understanding of what Imola demands. And now that we understand how Max turned an uncertain opportunity into a total victory, it's time to turn our attention to what his rivals were doing in the meantime. Because while Red Bull was shining, McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes were also playing their cards. But not everything went as expected. While Verstappen and Red Bull delivered a near-flawless performance at the front, the other major championship contenders struggled to find their place in a race that quickly became unfavorable for them. McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes weren't mere spectators, but each faced specific limitations that impacted their performance and highlighted the difference between having speed and converting it into a result. Interestingly, they all appeared to be prepared. Each team brought upgrades. Each driver had a clear strategy. However, the final result showed that race control goes far beyond theory. Let's start with McLaren. The British team arrived at Imola with high confidence. The 1-2 finish in Miami had not only given them valuable points, but also the feeling of having the most competitive technical package at the moment. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris set good times during free practice and qualifying, reinforcing the idea that they could dominate again. But on Sunday, things changed. The aggressive setup strategy, designed to maximize downforce, ended up working against them. Throughout the race, both drivers began to experience unexpected rear tire degradation, forcing them to ease their pace earlier than planned. The car had been developed to attack in qualifying, but its balance wasn't optimized for race management. Technical director Andrea Stella summed it up honestly. "We had the pace on Saturday, but we didn't know how to carry it over to Sunday." That lack of adaptability was decisive. Oscar Piastri, who started from pole, had a decent race, but it was clear he didn't have the tools to defend against a more efficient and calculating Verstappen. Lando Norris, though competitive in terms of pace, was also hampered by the drop in tire performance in the more technical sections. They tried to push, but the RB21 responded with greater stability, and each attempt backfired. Thus, what seemed like a race to consolidate his lead ended up being a harsh lesson in the importance of balancing speed and conservation. For Ferrari, the story was even more complex. They were racing at home, which added an emotional component to the challenge. The team had made significant improvements to the SF25, particularly aimed at improving its handling in medium-speed corners, where they had been below expectations in previous races. During qualifying, they showed some competitiveness, but it quickly became clear that their race pace was still a step behind. Lewis Hamilton, who races for Ferrari this season, achieved a creditable fourth place, the team's best result so far this year. However, performance was inconsistent. On the straights, the car responded with good thrust, but in mixed corners, it lost time to Red Bull and McLaren. The engineers detected that the car's balance was still not where it should be, and although the adjustments made help reduce the deficit, they were not enough to pose a real threat. What was most striking in Ferrari's case was its lack of reaction to the VSC. While Red Bull took advantage of the neutralization to execute a perfect stop, Ferrari hesitated. That lack of immediate decision-making cost them crucial seconds and, with them, any chance of fighting for the podium. The pressure of racing at home, combined with the urgent need to show progress, seemed to paralyze the team at times. Despite their progress, they still haven't found the perfect formula to stay in the fight for victory consistently. Mercedes, on the other hand, approached the race with more modest expectations. James Allison had been clear. The updates introduced for Imola weren't going to radically change the landscape, but they were necessary steps. They worked on the front wing and the engine cover profile, seeking to improve the W16 stability in fast corners. And while the changes resulted in some improvement in the car's predictability, the overall pace was still far from the leader's level. George Russell finished 7th, and his subsequent statement was blunt: "We're better, but still not enough." The German team appears to be in a transitional phase, where each improvement allows them to better understand the car, but they still can't extract the full performance they need to fight for the top spots. Each of these three teams had their own expectations before Imola, and all encountered a much more complex reality. McLaren suffered from relying too much on its speed without consolidating its race performance. Ferrari, although showing progress, failed to capitalize on its opportunities when it mattered most. And Mercedes, despite clear improvements, still lacks the necessary force to challenge the front. The difference with Red Bull wasn't just in the numbers, but in the execution, in the precise reading of the moment, and in the ability to transform limitations into advantages. The Imola Grand Prix not only gave Max Verstappen a strategic victory, but also redefined the dynamics of the championship. This race marked a turning point in the narrative of the 2025 season. Red Bull, which until a few weeks ago seemed like a team that had lost some of its technical edge, now demonstrates that it still possesses the ability to respond strongly when pressed. Not only because of what it achieved on the track, but also because of what this means in the medium term. The victory at Imola was a clear statement that Verstappen and his team are not willing to give up ground so easily. The most important thing now is to understand how this result can influence what lies ahead: the next rounds, strategic decisions, technical developments, and the psychological impact on rivals. The first thing to note is that this victory was neither accidental nor isolated. Red Bull showed a level of adaptation that could set a trend. The RB21, which began the weekend with visible weaknesses in its aerodynamic setup, finished the race transformed into a solid, fast, and consistent car. That ability to adjust in record time is an advantage that goes beyond a single race. It's a warning to the rest of the paddock. If Red Bull can fine-tune its performance even at its worst, it will be extremely dangerous on the tracks that best suit its design philosophy. The team knows that upcoming races, such as Monaco and Canada, demand precise traction readings, slow corners, and maximum efficiency from the high downforce aerodynamic package. And that's precisely the direction Red Bull has already begun working toward. In technical terms, this evolution means that the upcoming circuits could become clear opportunities for Red Bull to make up ground in the Constructors' Championship. McLaren currently leads, but has shown signs of vulnerability when conditions change or when they must manage beyond pure speed. The performance at Imola revealed that its technical package still has weaknesses in thermal management and prolonged race balance. If these deficiencies aren't corrected in time, circuits like Monaco, where degradation is unpredictable and overtaking opportunities are minimal, could amplify these shortcomings. Red Bull, on the other hand, could capitalize on the moment to score key points on tracks where experience and strategic control are even more decisive than qualifying pace. Added to this is an intangible but crucial factor: the morale boost. For Verstappen, winning on a weekend that started off on an uphill climb reaffirms his authority as the project leader. It strengthens his bond with the engineers, reinforces his confidence in the evolution of the RB21, and above all, reestablishes his image as a dominant driver who doesn't need ideal conditions to win. This perception has concrete effects inside and outside the team. Internally, it encourages the entire technical team to continue developing the car with a clear goal: to return to the top. Externally, it puts pressure on his rivals, who now know that even when Max seems out of the game, he can appear and change everything. In the case of Ferrari and Mercedes, the future outlook is more uncertain. Ferrari has shown progress, yes, but it's still incremental. If they want to compete consistently, they will need to accelerate their mid-season developments and, more importantly, improve their strategic decision-making. Because technical improvements are of no use if they aren't accompanied by precise actions when windows of opportunity open, as happened with the virtual safety car at Imola. Mercedes, meanwhile, is in the midst of rebuilding. Their ability to close the gap on the leaders will depend not only on the effectiveness of their improvements, but also on the calendar. They need tracks where their new setup has a real impact. If not, they will continue to miss out on the podium at key races, which could leave them out of any mathematical possibility in the second half of the championship. The most interesting thing about all this is that the championship has now taken on a new shape. It's no longer a linear battle between stable teams. It's a strategic war, a race between developments, adjustments, readings, and reactions. The decisions made in these next 3 or 4 rounds will have a direct effect on the final standings. And now, after what happened at Imola, there's one team that looks as fearsome as ever, Red Bull. If they can maintain this momentum, we could be witnessing the start of a comeback that overturns everything that seemed established in the opening races.